Hello everyone and welcome to episode 11 of The Spawn Point. We are joined once again with the original Steve Barnett as we have gone back in time, and we've also managed to meet our special guest for this week, which is Marty McFly. Steve, how does it feel not to be a cyborg?
Well, it feels great. I feel really good to be back here, and it's just totally amazing.
Well, me and Andy kind of liked having 2.0, but we'll tolerate
Yeah.
for the original.
We will. We will.
Yeah. But this episode is sponsored by Virtual Gladiators. They actually have got a summer sale at the moment, so ignore the 10% off code that we usually say. It's actually 60% off for the first month. It's a little bit like Steam sale, but for servers, if you want to think of it that way. So you do save a lot for the first month, and it only lasts until the 31st of July, I've been told. So if you're planning on getting a server, now's the perfect time. But this episode is all about single-player games and whether there's a future for them, are they dying, and is multiplayer taking over with the whole gaming scene. So, guys, do any of you still play single-player games on a regular basis, or is everything all multiplayer for you?
I still play single player. I mean, I was looking at my Steam sort of library earlier, and I was just like, yeah, there's a good amount of single player games on there, like all of the Walking Dead stuff. I'm still playing, like all of that. There's obviously Light, which we looked at. There's a lot on my list still.
You see, I thought that I didn't play any single-player games anymore, and then I realised that I played both Walking Dead games, and also The Wolf Among Us. I think on PC I play single-player games, but when it comes to console, I don't tend to as much. Steve, you said before to me that you can't ever play Minecraft games on single-player?
No,
Why is that?
I'm kind of a person that I like to interact with other people, but doing it as on a single player game, you can't interact with anyone, only apart from the in-game characters, unless you find yourself like me, where you start talking to yourself, all the characters, and then it makes you feel that, So, for me, single player, I mainly play it on PC, but on console, I wouldn't play.
But may I remind you that you are the only person here in this group right now, out of the three of us, that's actually played The Last of Us, and that is a very single-player focused game, so they're not completely out of your lives, are they?
No. The Last of Us, I will
No.
admit. No,
No
I'm not going to spoil.
No spoils in the comment section either.
No.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The Last of Us, that will make you want to talk to yourself, because it's got some jump scares in
Is
it.
that the marketing point? The Last of Us. Make you want to talk to yourself.
Last
It
of
will
Us,
drive you insane.
The Last of Us, I could just talk for hours about this game, but I won't.
Please don't.
It is an
I don't
amazing
think
game.
we've got an hour to really cover that.
It's
But,
an amazing game, and it will make you talk to yourself.
I have
It'll make
this
you go
article.
insane.
I have I have a digital article in front of me, and it's from VentureBeat. It's not a recent article. It's posted in June, but it's basically saying that, talking about exactly what we're talking about: single-player games, are they dying? Is multiplayer taking over? And it says here that on the article, I like a good multiplayer match every now and then. I'm almost always competing on The Last of Us multiplayer mode. So, although we talked about The Last of Us has a really good single-player mode, they're still talking about the multiplayer aspects. Like, is there games that... Do we have to have multiplayer in games now? Is that like a requirement or some sort of co-op? Because I feel like all games are gradually becoming... I can't think of that many games anymore that are 100%. Maybe a lot of indie games, but AAA titles, they rarely ever seem to have now. 100% single player.
I kind of buy the game for half and half, really, for the single player and the multiplayer. I know that Andy's probably going to hit me with a stick, but Call of Duty, for instance, I buy Call of Duty not only for the multiplayer, but for the campaign.
Well, no, we talked about this on the last episode. Me and Andy, we don't hate the franchise.
No, I know.
We covered that. We made the disclaimer that
I know.
we don't hate the games. It's just that That's all you ever seem to bring up is a
Yeah, I know.
comparison.
But for example, I buy the Call of Duty series not only for the single player characteristics for it, but also for the multiplayer. If it didn't have single player, I probably would.
So is it a bigger deal that if a game developer was announcing their game and they said, okay, so the game has only single player, has no multiplayer, or they say the game has, no single player and it's just completely multiplayer. If it doesn't have one or the other, which is worse? Is it worse not to have multiplayer now, or is it worse not to have a single player?
It depends what type of game it is, really. For something like COD, whenever I've played that, I've never really played the single player campaign. It's just I'm just not interested in it. If I'm going to play COD, I want to go online, shoot a bunch of people for an hour in like a team deathmatch or something, and then I've had my fun and I'm done with it. I don't care much for the single player campaign in that.
Now, it's interesting you bring up first person shooters because Titanfall have Respawn Entertainment, those are developers. They stated that they're still going to have focus on the single player aspects of the next Titanfall game. And they're not going to neglect it, and it's not going to be 100% multiplayer. But I've played that game, and it seems to be completely multiplayer orientated. Like, you can't really do single player at all. The only bit you're on your own is the tutorial, and that is where everything else. Yeah, I mean,
when you say single player, do you mean story? Because the story mode was pretty much just multiplayer campaigns, only with a bit of story added to it, and that's.
When we're talking about single player, it's like just what when you're not playing with other players in your game session, it's literally just you on your own.
Because Titanfall, apart from the tutorial, it didn't have any of that. So I don't quite know.
Apparently they're changing that for the next one, but I don't know. That's all I've heard. Like, they are going to have a dedicated single player. But even games like Assassin's Creed is a noticeable shift because. That was always had, like, you had your, it started off as a single player only title or franchise, and then they introduced multiplayer, and now they're introducing co-op this year. So it feels like the single player is getting crowded by multiplayer and co-op and these other like kind of types of modes, and it's becoming less kind of important to having a game. Like, I feel if you told, especially people in their teens right now. This game has no single player, they wouldn't really be that bothered. They'd be that it wouldn't matter. But if you said it had no multiplayer, they'd be like, "What do you mean it doesn't have multiplayer? Like, this is 2014. Like, this game should." And even games that come out now, people are like, "Oh, single player games that come out, they're like, oh, it would be good to have a co-op feature, like The Forest, for example, which is an early access game." People are asking for co-op for that, so instantly people want to play with their friends. They want to play with other people. Not in that way. They want to play with they want to play with other people.
They don't want to play by themselves.
Basically, but not in that way.
Yeah.
Is this? Are we seeing a change here? And are they going to die eventually? We're going to have no single player.
I feel like it's dependent on the game type. Because I played the new Tomb Raider, and that had a multiplayer function in it, and I played it once or twice, and I just couldn't care less for it. I thought the single player aspect of it was a lot more interesting. I enjoyed the sort of story, which you don't generally get in a multiplayer game, apart from Titanfall, but that's a tiny sort of story side, which is you don't really care about too much, I found. And I played Tomb Raider simply for the single player, not for the multiplayer.
Yeah, I think it depends on if it's a story orientated game. Then you don't really need that multiplayer. But if it's a competitive type game, then it's people don't want to compete with themselves. They don't want to beat their own personal bests.
But if you had a game, for instance, that got made, and it only focused around multiplayer, then just imagine if you had no internet connection. You wouldn't
get the game then, would you?
Yeah. And another problem is
you wouldn't play it.
We mentioned last week on the Spawn Point that there was a game that you could pretend. And Steve, you haven't heard about this. Me and Andy, we need to sit down and tell you about this game because I would love to watch your reaction of what this game is about. Basically, you pretend to be aeroplanes in the game, and it's just humans running around like with their arms like airplanes, like meow. And you've got like everything's imaginary, like pretend, like, even the reaction there. But anyway, with that game, it was purely like multiplayer. So people were like, there's no one playing it, so I can't play the game. So if the game is a good game but has no other people playing on it, then that's going to be an issue because you have to rely on other people to be there to give you the content. Otherwise, you can't do anything.
Yeah, that's it. If enough people haven't bought into the fact that the game is any good, or the multiplayer aspects of it, then it's just going to die out really quickly. I think that again, that's something that Titanfall's really struggling with. I believe because it went into a second-hand game shop. Today,
I don't really.
Loads of copies of it.
I don't know what happened with Titanfall. Like it's kind of like Watch Dogs' cousin, and let me explain.
Go on.
In terms of the fact that both of these games had such massive hype behind them, they're like, oh, it's going to be the best game ever. Oh, it's going to be amazing. You know, like this is going to be like, the Titanfall's going to be the COD killer. Watch Dogs is going to be like, GTA, but you can hack things, and like both of these games had all these expectations, all this hype, and now you don't really hear much about them. You know, like they've gone quiet, especially Titanfall. Like I don't hear anybody. I don't see videos on Titanfall on YouTube. Really, I don't hear people talking about the game. I haven't felt really compelled. I played it like a month ago, and I played a bit of it, but it was really fun to start with. I was like, oh, it's amazing, you know, like it's really good, like some of these new mechanics, and then I don't know I really don't know what happened. Like,
I'm really shocked at that.
It just
I'm really shocked at that.
What are you shocked at? That Matt got bored with it? Or?
No, that people don't put the content on the internet, and people are moving away from it. Not necessarily moving away from it, but people are getting bored from it. I mean, I played it around my friend's house, but it just kind of shocks me. That's all. That kind of game that people can get bored of it, you know.
It's more that I don't know. It's a new IP. It needs to. Like you could release a game and you could slap the words Call of Duty on it, and it would sell quicker than you can say, Steve, we're upgrading you to 2.0 again. You know, like that's literally what happens. So it is a new IP. It needs to make a name for itself, and people are just not very familiar with the franchise because it's just started. But that isn't the issue of the game being purely multiplayer. I don't think that's why it didn't succeed. I think that's, different issues. I think a game could be 100% multiplayer and do fine for itself right now, but I don't know about the same about single player. I think if a game is 100% single player now, as a AAA title, it's a very risky move to make. Maybe not with indie games because, I think most... Would you both agree that indie games are, most single player games now are indie games? Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Compared to AAA?
Yeah.
And I mean this in the fact that it has zero multiplayer, like zero multiplayer features at all.
I
can't think of
say completely. Something like, well, no, it's not really AAA, is it? Something like Child of Light.
That's treated more like an indie title.
Yeah, even though it's not really.
Other than Telltale games, I can't think of, off the top of my head, I can't think of like a game that is purely successful based off a single player. Like I'm kind of worried that this is we're going towards the end of single player. Like sometimes I do like to play games on my own, and I don't want to have to be able to constantly play, because I'm sure we've all had bad experiences on multiplayer before, but on single player, you don't run into some loudmouth person shouting down the microphone, calling you all the names under the sun.
Let me tell you something about The Last of Us though. The thing is, Last of Us got multiplayer and it's got single player, but when I played it and a few of my friends played it, they were more drawn in to play the single player because you've got so much. When you play it, you get so addicted to it. You just want to find out what's going to happen, when you go back and play it again, and, et cetera, et cetera. And it just, draws you in. But I didn't really want to play the multiplayer, and a few of my friends that played it as well were just wanting to do the single player aspect.
And that's like with Assassin's Creed games that I have purchased that do have multiplayer features in them, that have multiplayer modes. When it first came out, I was like, yeah, it's pretty cool. I'll try it out, and it was very repetitive. I think games struggle that when they become from being purely a single player game and try and force a multiplayer, even though it doesn't really make much sense, and they try and force it upon people and try and naturally, it doesn't work as well. When a game is purely focused on multiplayer from the start, that goes a bit better. But when I was playing Assassin's Creed 3 and 4, I didn't touch the multiplayer at all. I was focused, and that is because of the story. And I think this is the root of the problem, is that trying to get a compelling story in a video game that people can remember and can affect people. I think, I'm trying to think one that was like Mafia 2, which came out all the way back in 2009, I believe.
Yeah.
That had no multiplayer whatsoever. That I think I didn't. It was just purely single player. It was an open world single player, and that was quite well story driven and kept me interested without having any multiplayer.
Here you go. I found South Park. That's completely single player, and that's a pretty big game. Sims, I guess, is...
They're trying to they're trying to get more multiplayer features onto it, aren't they?
Yeah.
Of some level. And people constantly asking, like, oh, are we going to get like a Sims where we can play online together? Like, gamers are asking for this just as much as the developers are planning to do it. Like, people's first question seems to be with the game, or one of the first questions. If it's not price, if it's not platform, it's, does it have multiplayer? That seems to be a very common question with most games. Like, oh, I've got this really cool game and I've been playing it for a few hours. Oh, right, does it have multiplayer? And that seems to be like a general thing now.
Half and half for me, really. As long as the game's got both halves of it, that's ideal for me.
I'd say one of the games that I really did enjoy both the single and multiplayer aspect of was Portal 2, because I think they managed to keep that sort of more interesting in the fact that the single player and the multiplayer sort of aspects of it were just completely different and two separate stories completely. So yeah, I have to say that was worth playing as a co-op game, and it took me ages to actually find someone else that had it, that was on, even though it had crossplay.
And I mean,
I really enjoyed.
That's an example of when it makes sense. Portal 2 had co-op, and so it made sense because working together, there was a purpose to it, rather than just saying, quick guys, we've got to think of a multiplayer mode, because I feel like some developers are making these multiplayer modes just because people are asking for them in games. So they think, our game will sell better if we have multiplayer. But it needs to have a purpose. And Steve, have you played Portal 2 before, haven't you?
Yeah, you lost your temper with me on Portal 2.
I don't remember that at all. But I'm sure that happened. I would believe that if you told me Matt lost his temper with me on Portal 2.
You told me to put a portal on one place and I messed up.
Was I really angry?
Yeah.
Really?
I can imagine Steve like getting to the stage of just not doing what you say.
He got starting
to flip tables everywhere.
No, Matt went upstairs and he said, right, put the portal there. So I put a portal there and I put another one in the wrong place. He said, no, put it there. I was like, no, do it.
I think it was because we had been trying to do the same thing
for about
at least half. It felt
this does
like
not surprise me.
It was probably like 20 minutes, but it felt like 4 hours. It was.
I always remember he said to me, "Are you doing this on purpose?" And I was like,
"Yeah." And I was like, "What have I done for you to do this to me on purpose, Steve? Is this some kind of practical joke?" He's like, "I'm trying as hard as I can.
I am doing. I'm not putting a prank on you. I don't understand."
Did I forget your birthday or something? Why are you doing this?
But yeah, like that is a perfect example of when it makes sense, having co-op in a game like Portal 2. And I think, you have to pick what game. Don't force having a multiplayer mode, because it's not like when, as soon as a game has a multiplayer mode, you're like, oh, I want to buy that just because it's got multiplayer. Like, as gamers, most of us are not stupid. So we know not
see
to...
that little smile.
I was going to say, I like that little smile and just the glance over to Steve's area.
Yeah, I saw that.
Wow.
I saw that.
No, I wasn't. Actually, on my screen, I wasn't looking at that because you're in different areas. I wasn't. I was not. But anyway, I was. What my point was is that we look at more in a game just if it's got multiplayer. We actually look to find out about the game and the features and what kind of content there is. We don't just go, oh, if it's got multiplayer, then I'll buy it. Like we're not that fickle.
I would also say that about the fact that if it had a single player aspect as well, if it is primarily a multiplayer game and they just tap on a single player aspect, if that's absolute garbage, I'm not going to play it. Like a good example of this is if anyone remembers, what was it actually called? The single player Counter-Strike.
I see, because I've played Counter-Strike and I played
Condition Zero.
I played multiplayer on that. I was going to say full player. I don't know what that meant. But yeah, I played messing my words up there. But yeah, I only played multiplayer on that. So
well, yeah, Condition Zero was a separate game. Well, it's separate in inverted commas. It came out years after the original one came out, and they're just like people really want a single player, so let's give them one.
But did you ever play the Unreal Tournament games that came out?
Yes.
And that had... See, this is weird for me. I don't know if anyone else was the same. And I think this is back when it was Unreal Tournament 2002 and 2004, which were like the better versions. And there was multiplayer on that, but I think I felt very intimidated playing online because everyone was better than me. So I was like, I'm going to play on single player and I'm going to play against AI. Like how you have combat training on Call of Duty, Steve. So you can relate. Yeah, so that had multiplayer, and I chose not to do it because I found out a lot more enjoyment on single player, just killing stupid AI and just, winning all the time. But I don't think, do any of you think that this is a requirement to have multiplayer, or it really just does depend on the title?
No, so some of the games I feel like they've just added on, just gone, here's a multiplayer aspect to it, and it's like, well, it's absolutely shit. You could have spent the time that you've made the multiplayer developing the single player campaign slightly better, and just saved a lot of time and money. But no, you just chuck that onto the game, and it's just, what's the point?
The best kind of scenario I can think of this is with horror games. So there are most horror games are single player experience because people say they're more immersive. It's more scary if you're on your own. Now, would co-op ruin a horror experience in a horror game? Can co-op work?
It depends who you're playing with, I think.
I think I still yet to play it, but Dead Space 3 or Dead Space 3.
Dead Space.
Dead Space. That had a co-op campaign in it.
Yeah,
and
they
changed.
Yeah.
See, now I'm yet to play it, but apparently, one of it scared him. He pooed his pants today. He had to run to the bathroom a lot. I hear that one of the people on the co-op sees something slightly different to the other camera, so it sort of keeps the sort of jump scariness and the horror.
I think
there. Does that actually work?
It was kind of okay. So I'm going to explain what it was like with me and Steve playing Dead Space 3 co-op.
Was it a Portal experience again?
No, it wasn't that. It wasn't a frustrating experience. It was, and it's more to do with whether it was scary and all that. So sometimes when Steve would suddenly scream and he would make my heart what was scary about the game wasn't the game itself. It was Steve's reactions that scared me. So I would just be playing and nothing would happen, and it would be like a jump scare coming on screen, going ah, and I was going up and go, what was that? And then he just came across like an enemy.
So did Steve have the sort of the other view on the screen by any chance? Was he seeing stuff that you weren't on yours? Was that why he was going, oh my god, what's going on? I don't think so. I just think we were in different places at different times. We were exploring some spaceship, and he was in one room and I was in the other, and all I could hear was him screaming. I didn't know what was going on, and so I came in, and he was like, "Oh, it's gone now. I killed it or something." And I was like, "Oh, okay. What was it?" He's like,
I don't know. It was like a bug thing or something. I don't know. It was, but it was just that we were in. I think we saw the same things pretty much, but we were just at different places at different times, and because we weren't forced to stick together, we had a little bit of separation between us. That was it was more scary thinking, not knowing what's going on. Like in a horror film when one of them locks himself in a room and the other person can't escape, and the person who's safe can hear the other person like screaming in terror, but they can't see anything going on because they're hiding, whatever. It's a little bit like that, and I think it does scare you, and it has a horror aspect, but in a different way than single player does. So yeah, it does depend. Steve is right. It does depend on who you're playing with.
I think it's better. Not kind of better, but I think it's okay because you can feed off the other person's fear, like Matt did.
But then you could.
I just imagine you just there, just like, excellent. Matt will be
Give him some
scared now.
I did feel that you were intentionally just trying to do it sometimes. Like he was just making noises just to make me jump. And but yeah, no, if you're just constantly sticking together, then I don't think it is scary because you could just be like, all right, oh, there's something around the corner. Can you come help me? Like it's not, compared to like an NPC that you might be with in a single player game, and they're you don't know what they're doing, but because you can't actually talk to them and go, where are you? And they won't respond. But you don't get you don't get lost with each other if it's a co-op experience, and it not only does it depend on the person, but it depends on the game as well that you're playing. Dead Space 3 was a good example of one that it worked well with.
Dead Space 3 was a good game.
I was just imagining for some reason that the AI player was like Siri. Like, where are you? I'm sorry, Matt. I don't know where you are.
I've been eaten by a demon.
Don't know why I thought that.
But yeah, so yeah, the horror aspects, the horror genre of games, I think, is one of the most controversial parts of like single player and multiplayer. A lot of the other games can kind of have a good mix, but I tell you what doesn't work. Co-op works for horror games, but multiplayer doesn't. Like, do you ever find Left 4 Dead 1 or 2 to be scary on versus mode? I personally don't. Where some of you control the zombies.
Played it.
Yeah, I've played that. Yeah,
Or when the other players control the zombies, it's not as scary because they don't do things that would normally, like, they're not going to create suspense and then, hide at the right times. They might just be blatantly obvious where they are and just run out at you full rampage. I think you need the enemies to be, in a game like that, they need to be controlled by the game rather than by a player.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So, overall, to summarise, I think the general gist of what I've got from what everyone said here is that single-player games have still got some life in them. They've still got a bright future ahead of them.
They've still got their place.
But
I feel.
I say multiplayer. Multiplayer games, probably that we're going to see more of those than single-player now because times have changed.
Yeah, but again, it all depends what kind of title it is. If it fits single player, if it fits the multiplayer, then yeah, we may see a lot more multiplayer compared to single player. But again, it all depends what the game is.
I mean, I think that's something that we were chatting about in the sort of light preview, which is on the channel right now, so you should check that out. But you're asking, is there a co-op mode in that? And I was like, well, no, I don't think it would suit a co-op mode at all. And again, for something like that, I just don't feel that would have been able to have and pull off co-op at all. So yeah, there's definitely game types that will work single player, game types that will work multiplayer, and not the other way around.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I would pretty much have to agree, and this is why I thought, that we're not going to disagree too much because we all enjoy single player games, we all enjoy multiplayer games. We want to see a mix of both of them, not just completely one or the other. And yeah, I don't think single player games are dying, regardless of what a lot of people might believe or think. Because there are a lot of good, strong titles out there that are, very story driven, 100% single player. So yeah, short answer, no, they're not dying. But what do you guys think, you viewers? Let us know in that comment section. Do you play single player games? I'm sure you do. But if you don't, let us know. And If you disagree as well, be sure to let us know. And if you prefer to have Steve Barnett 2.0, he may, like we said before, he may make a return. It all depends. But we will have to go back in time again, and we'll have to.
Are you trying to say he may be back?
Yes, but without having some kind of Terminator lawsuit going on.
2.0 version will be back, I guarantee you.
Yes.
He will be back.
Well, that has been all for episode 11 of The Spawn Point. We will see you next week. Until then, goodbye.
Good boo!